Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. And it's a nice
Good morning.
morning. We're up here nicely together, and we're ready for one of our first interviews with ShaundraToy. ShaundraToy has an amazing background, and she's focused over the last 17 years has been over the ever-changing world of print, packaging, and publishing in these type of industries. She's worked for Fortune 500 companies like Eastman Kodak and Pantone, a Danaher company. So she has a lot of experience with the dynamics of the changing world. And that's what's going to be our topic today is Shaundra's going to give us a little bit of an oversight on her experience of how she's managed change over the years. To learn more about Shaundra, we have her LinkedIn profile at the bottom, and her contact information if you'd like to ask her more questions. I've met Shaundra over the last 4 years through Project Management Institute. She's done classes and she's been a star within the organization. So, hi Shaundra, how are you today?
Oh, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you everybody for joining and taking the time to listen. So I'm super excited to talk about this subject with you because this is one of my favorite topics.
Great.
So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. I'm sure we're going to do a lot more together with our profession and then getting the word out on improving people's profession by the topics that we'll talk about. So let's get started. So what does grief have to do with change? Because you often refer to that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I was a little surprised by it when I was reading about it and studying about it in the change certification program. But it does have a lot of similarities in that something is always left behind when you're starting something new. And like I said, this fascinated me during my certification process, primarily because I was going through a ton of personal change at the same time. Just for perspective, in about a 5-year period, I got divorced, moved, remodeled a house, finished my PMP certification, changed jobs, remarried again, moved, remodeled a second house. And the one that really threw me for a loop was when I was told my job was moving to Europe. There was a flood of emotions, mostly because of personal history. My dad was laid off from aerospace when I was a senior in high school, oldest of 7 kids. My mom was a homemaker and worked from home. And so this was very scary for me back then, and it just brought all those emotions back again. Job security and my career was always priority number one. I always worked extra hard. So it was a bit of a shock to hear them say they were going to move the role to Europe, and now I was sort of stuck without a way to make an income. And so the traditional stages of grief really do apply. You've got denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. The major difference with change management is that there's a few more twists. You get a lot more of those peripheral emotions like shame and guilt and fear. And what I found personally was that these emotions, you had good days and bad, just like any change. And the emotions bounced around like a pinball machine. Often they would land back on fear. And that was one of the major differences. The other one is that when you can get past that fear and sit with acceptance for a little while, there's this amazing creativity and problem solving that comes out of it. And so the key to getting there is breaking free of fear.
That's great. That's great. So explain to me, if fear can be so paralyzing, how do you break from fear?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it is paralyzing. It can be devastatingly paralyzing. The short answer is to try to do something, to step into action with some sort of purpose. And I had 2 techniques for doing this. The first one was really about trying to find a way to solve the problem. And first thing you have to do is get clear on what is the problem and what power do I have to solve it. So sorting was the technique that I used, and I journaled since I was 8 years old. And so they're, reading back through those journals are kind of comical now, but it's a great sounding board just as a tool by itself. But what I would do is I would take a journal page, I would fold it in half towards the spine, and create 2 columns. And then I would take all these overwhelming feelings and emotions and situations, and I would just sort them into what are the things that I can control and what are the things that I can't. So the things that I can control, I can act on in some way. And the things that I can't control, I have to find a way to accept these new parameters and work within them. So that was the first technique. The second technique I call redirecting. And it has to do with getting sort of a mental break from the stress of what you're going through. So I'll give you an example. If anybody's ever had a toddler and you don't want the toddler to touch something, the last thing you do is tell them don't touch that, because then they're fascinated by it, right? All they want to do is touch it. And so you kind of have to distract them or redirect them from the thing that you want them to stay away from. Well, my brain is just like a toddler, right? If I try not to think about something that's bothering me, it's virtually impossible to do. And so one of the techniques that I use is I'll just try to dive headlong into some other hobby that's got nothing to do with what's going on, just to get a mental break. So whether it's a hobby, whether it's, you know, hanging out with some friends, or getting a good book, or in my case, getting another certification, that always seemed to work for me to redirect from the stress of what was going on. So using these 2 methods really helped me to step into action with some purpose.
That's excellent. That's very creative, especially with the toddler example. So let me ask you, once you get past these 2 fears, or the fear, how does creativity of problem solving come in?
Well, once you've accepted the parameters, you want to try to be as open-minded, as flexible as you can. There's a really great quote by Esther Bergeron. Necessity is the mother of invention. And she kind of oddly, this came up in her book, The Conditions of Agricultural Growth, the Economics of Agrarian Change Under Population Growth. Interesting. But, you know, necessity really is the mother of invention. And I have 3 techniques for doing this. So first off, we often have blinders on, and it's sort of like feeling around in a dark room that you've never been in and trying to find a light switch. So part of this exercise is just finding your blind spots. Getting familiar with your new surroundings and your new parameters is really important. And as you look at these new surroundings, you can look at them either with grief for what was, or you can shift the focus into how do we do things more creatively. And I'll give you a couple of examples. You know, my daughter is a senior in high school this year, and we may not have a stadium full of people sitting around in the hot sun at our graduation this year, but you know, we might also just have the most memorable graduation of all, because it's going to have to be very creative and different. I had a PMI seminar I was doing right when this kicked off, and if you'd asked me 3 days before the seminar whether I could host something with 45 people and group exercises online, I just said no way. The day of, though, after creating 4 hours of material, and they said they were going to cancel, darn straight I'm going to find a way to move that online, because that's a lot of effort to put into something to just have it canceled. So, and it worked out great. There wasn't a lot of changes that we had to make to the slides to make it work for everybody, but it did come out pretty well. So that's the first technique. Just get familiar with your surroundings and try not to look at them with this grief, but creatively try to find ways to make it fun and interesting. The second one is in a group setting when you're trying to execute a large change management effort. Making sure that people are engaged with finding solutions is really important. Harvard Business Review had a couple of really great articles that I'll just point you to. Both of them came out in 2013. One was Employee Engagement Does More Than Boost Productivity. This was by John Baldoni on July 4th, 2013. And he talked about all of the really great things that come from keeping people engaged with this problem solving. And then the second article is called The Price of Incivility. And this was authored by two wonderful women, Christine Perath and Christine Pearson. And this is from January and February 2013 issue. And this is on the cost of incivility. And this is something that we don't talk about a lot in business, but it has an amazing impact on creativity. If people are feeling that they're in an environment that's a little more hostile and not really engaging them properly, the creativity suffers tremendously by about 30%, not just in how creative people are willing to be, but also in how creative the solutions are that they come up with. So making sure that your employees are engaged is super important, and finding ways to involve them in the problem-solving process. You'll be surprised at what they come up with. And then lastly, I would say look at what other people are doing. The amount of online meeting tools that are available now with virtual backgrounds, and also fun sound effects. It's really kind of made it a very interesting environment. So I'm looking forward to seeing what people come up with. And my hope is that in accepting your new parameters, it gives you the ability to invent new ways of doing things and uncovering new opportunities in an ever-changing environment.
That's
so there you are.
Thank you so much, Shaundra. I'm just delighted to have you, and you are amazing. Everybody, if you have any questions, please put your comments on our YouTube channel or on LinkedIn. We will be posting all the information there as well. So if you have any questions, send them over, and we'll see you on our next topic. Stay tuned and appreciate your time. Take care.